It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of sound business decisions, it was the age of poor customer service. It was the epoch of rising stock prices, it was the epoch of falling stock prices. It was the spring of the third fiscal quarter, it was the winter of the second fiscal quarter. We had Mass Effect 3 before us, we had the Old Republic before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. So yeah, Bioware and EA. First, a bit of history. This'll be short. In 1995, three dudes founded a company called Bioware and made a bunch of video games. Their company grew in size and reputation. Then, in 2007, another bigger company named Electronic Arts acquired the holding company created by the private equity firm that was supervising the partnership between whatever. EA bought Bioware. And Bioware carried on making games as before. See, I told you it would be short. Part 1. So what? So what, you might say? Companies buy other companies all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. It's one of the ways that capital finds its way to people with good ideas. And EA has no reason to mess with Bioware's creative process. Bioware's creative process is the source of their value. EA has every incentive to leave it alone. All of that is true, but here's the problem. EA is doomed to mess with Bioware's creative process whether they want to or not. Here's why. If you've ever taken business courses, or maybe a course in auditing or internal controls or other boring stuff like that, you may have come across the phrase tone at the top. Here's the short version of what this phrase means. The personalities of the people in charge will leak down through the rest of the company. Here's a diagram of the decision-making hierarchy of a typical game development company. Every step on this pyramid is eager to please the step above it, and every step on the pyramid also sets the tone for the step below it. The grande enchilada of Bioware is only a medium muck-a-muck by EA standards. To understand what this means, let's take a look at what Bioware's culture is like. Remember the three dudes that founded Bioware? They were all doctors who had gone to medical school together, and they pooled about $100,000 together between the three of them to found the company. If you're a practicing medical doctor and it's 1995, putting all of your savings into a video game startup is not the soundest of financial decisions. The fact that they did this at all shows that, from the beginning, Bioware was about more than money. Not that they didn't care about money at all. After all, with no revenue, there's no employee salaries or equipment or office space, which means there's no games getting made. But the money was a means to an end. This shouldn't surprise anyone. You don't make games as good as the ones they've made without having some level of passion underneath it all, and that passion is still there. But now there's another corporate culture seeping down from above. Let's look at what the tone at the top of EA looks like. Here are the high muckamucks and grande enchilada of EA. The CEO's last two jobs were at a private equity firm and the bakery division of the Sara Lee Corporation. The others have similar backgrounds. Most of them are suits, not gamers. This is not a bad thing in and of itself. People in suits can be a force for good in some situations, but their priorities are ordered differently than Bioware's. Instead of making money so that they can make games, at EA the plan is to make games so that they can make money. This difference in collective priorities causes a difference in collective behavior. So what is EA's collective behavior? You might think that the people who run big companies spend their time sitting behind mahogany desks and talking about how much money they have. But they also spend a lot of time worrying. If they're breaking even, they worry that they might start losing money. If they're losing money, they worry that they might start losing more money. And if they're making money, they worry that they might start making slightly less money. This is why most annual reports contain a section called Risk Factors or something similar. These are the things that the suits spend their time worrying about. If you want to get a sense of what's driving the decision-making at your favorite publicly traded corporation, this is a good place to look. So let's look there. Here are the first two items listed in that section. 1. Our business is intensely competitive and hit-driven. If we do not deliver hit products and services, or if consumers prefer our competitors' products or services over our own, our operating results could suffer. 2. Our operating results will be adversely affected if we do not consistently meet our product development schedules, or if key events or sports seasons we tie our product release schedules to are delayed or cancelled. Translation: get the hits out and get them out on time. FIFA is EA's flagship game in terms of sales, and it represents the ideal EA game. It sells a gazillion copies and they can release it every year. From EA's perspective, their best strategy is clear: make our other games as much like FIFA as possible. Part 2. What does this mean for us, the whiny, entitled customers? Mass Effect is not FIFA after all. One's a sports game and one's an RPG, so what does this have to do with us? Warning: I'm about to attempt something difficult. I'm about to attempt a slippery slope argument. See, arguments can be separated into two broad categories. In one category, you have your fallacies. These are things like the straw man, the false choice, and the appeal to authority. In the other, you have your valid arguments, like all of the ones I make, without exception. The slippery slope is sometimes called an informal fallacy, meaning that it exists in an irritating gray area between the two categories. If you make it right, you win. If you fuck it up, you lose. That's kind of an oversimplification, but whatever. Here goes. On the same day that Mass Effect 3 was released, Bioware also released a $10 downloadable content pack called From Ashes, which unlocked a new squad member and his attendant mission, dialogue, and assets. Some of this content was already on the Mass Effect 3 disc. And all across the internet, there was much weeping and rending of garments. The content of the DLC seemed like the sort of thing that would have been included in the game itself back in, say, 2003. I don't want to get into whether this was morally right or whatever. Instead, let's talk about something we can hopefully all agree on. It pissed a lot of people off. Whenever a company does something like this, they're making a calculation. They take the amount of extra money they're making by jerking their customer around and divide it by the amount of money they expect to get from that same customer over the long run. Then, they hope that that number is greater than the probability that this will alienate that customer and lose those future sales. The problem is that two of the three values in this equation are very difficult to guess, and there isn't a lot of margin for error. If we were playing poker, I would say that your pot odds are not favorable. No, don't do it! He tricked you! He has us straight! But no problem, you might say. The bean counters at EA are on top of this, right? Surely they've calculated the optimal strategy to maximize long-term revenue, right? Sure, in theory. In theory, this is the sort of decision businesses are good at making, balancing short-term profit with long-term sustainability. But if you've paid any attention to the business world for the past forever years, you've probably noticed that businesses botch decisions like this all the time. Even big, important companies run by big, important people in expensive suits regularly shit the bed and fail due to short-sightedness and greed. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. At this point, you may have noticed that what I'm saying is starting to get absurd. I just compared the release of Day 1 DLC with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. This is what makes a slippery slope argument so difficult. You have to start with silly hyperbole and then work your way backwards to what's actually happening, and it's easy to trip and faceplant along the way. So let me try again, this time using a relevant comparison. There was a point in my life, around 1999 or so, when I assumed that I would be buying every Final Fantasy game released between then and the end of time. Now, Final Fantasy games are released and I barely even notice. Even if they're reviewed well, I don't buy them. This isn't because Square, or Squeenix, or whatever they're called now, committed some unforgivable sin that caused me to boycott the series forever. It's because I just gradually lost interest as the games got farther and farther away from the things I used to like about them. Could the same thing happen to Bioware? It's already happening. Look! It's not that bad yet. They're still pretty far up the slope with decent footing. But one of the best ways to avoid sliding down is to have a bunch of chicken littles like me around, frantically squawking about how bad it is at the bottom. Part 3. What does this mean for EA? Probably nothing. EA is unlikely to change at this point. Generally, the bigger something is, and the more momentum it has, the harder it is for it to change direction. And EA has gotten pretty goddamn big. It's not clear what being so big has done for them. Are they making money? I actually have some training as an accountant, enough to know that if I tried to answer that question properly, I would probably get it wrong. But I'll give it a shot anyway. So, factor in merchandising, carry the 7, move the decimal point, near as I can tell, The answer is no. They're not tanking or anything, but they're not exactly raking it in either. They just seem to be treading water. And the market agrees with me. Their share price fell off a cliff in 2008 along with the rest of the economy and hasn't recovered since then. They've underperformed compared to relevant indices. And this isn't because EA is one of those companies where all the money goes to feed the ever more bloated salaries of entrenched executives. These guys are making a lot of money, sure, but not an absurd amount given the size of the company they're running. So why aren't they more profitable? Let me answer that question with a question. Why would we expect them to be? Because they're big and treat their employees like crap and just generally seem kind of evil? That doesn't necessarily add up to them being profitable. See, EA falls into the category of firm that business analysts call a fucknormous game publishing superconglomerate or fugpusk. And many of those same analysts wonder, is a fugpusk the best way to meet the needs of the customer? And is a fugpusk the best vehicle for maximizing shareholder value? Now, I admit that I'm getting farther and farther out of my depth here, but all the evidence we have indicates that the answer to both of these questions is no. So if EA is all about money, and they're not even making that much, why don't they change? Because they can't. Once a company gets big enough, the primary purpose of their existence is ensuring that they continue to exist. They build up enough organizational inertia that changing them or dislodging them from the marketplace becomes nearly impossible. The only way is to buy them out and dismantle them, or wait for them to slowly die. My guess is that we're in for a long wait. Part 4. What does this mean for Bioware? So we've seen several worrying trends in Bioware's games and their reception by their fans, and we have no reason to think that any of these trends are going to change. So if you're a Bioware employee, what do? In my opinion, if you haven't already done so, you psychologically prepare yourself for the possibility that you may have to do what we in the business call pulling an Avalone. In other words, you just up and leave. Is that crazy? Yes. But let me explain why it's not quite as crazy as it sounds. The conventional wisdom is that big publishers like Activision and EA are the future, the logical endpoint of the business side of gaming. Development costs are going up, requiring bigger teams, bigger studios, bigger budgets, more capital, and more business expertise needed to recoup an investment. But how much of that conventional wisdom and how much of those extra costs come to us by way of giant publishers eager to justify their own existence? Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer, but I don't see why development costs need to be so much higher now than ever before. Here's a clip of a recently released game. Not bad. Distinctive art style, slick-looking engine, physics-based gameplay. Who made this? Ubisoft maybe, or Valve? Nope. This is a game called Cube, and it was made by 3 dudes on a budget of $100,000. 3 dudes and $100,000. Does that sound familiar? It's what founded Bioware back in 1995. When you adjust for inflation, that's only about $70,000 and 2.1 dudes. Game development costs should be going down, not up. Let's look at some facts. 1. The licensing of engines and middleware spreads their development costs over a larger number of projects, decreasing them for each project. Building your own engine is expensive, but licensing one is comparatively cheap. And for the cost of a licensing fee, you can get the same engine and physics tools that many AAA developers use. What's more, as the industry has grown, the variety of middleware has grown. There's middleware for trees now. No longer must you pay the salaries of the 20 programmers in your tree team. You can outsource that and spread the cost of development over dozens of different companies. 2. You can publish more cheaply than ever before, and the costs scale downward more smoothly than ever before. You probably already know about Steam and Good Old Games. These are places where the fixed cost of publishing a game is almost zero, and the variable cost per unit is even less. Big publishers and brick-and-mortar retailers are constantly trying to convince you of their importance. Who are you going to believe? Them or your own lying eyes? 3. The spread of dedicated gaming websites and targeted online advertising means every marketing dollar spent has a higher return on investment than ever before. If there's a bright side to the impending privacyless dystopia barreling towards us, it's that you can advertise your game on the cheap. You don't have to break the bank to buy a billboard and hope that one of the people driving by it happens to like story-driven shooters. You can buy an ad on storydrivenshooters.com and get a much better bang for your buck. 4. There are more talented young job seekers than ever before, which will decrease your labor costs. Every trade school and their monkey has a game development curriculum now. Those wouldn't exist if there wasn't a demand for them, and the demand for them wouldn't exist if there weren't a ton of people who want to make games. This will lead to a glut in the labor market. If you're looking for a job, this kind of sucks, but if you're hiring, it's great. And you should be hiring. Throw some of these kids a bone, give them a chance. That Cube game I mentioned earlier was made by students. Students came up with the concept for Portal. There's real talent out there. 5. The lower cost of all of the above means your break-even point for sales is also lower. You don't have to sell a gajillion copies to turn a profit. You don't have to chase the casual market or the shooter market or whatever they say you have to chase. You can make games for people who are the same kind of weirdo you are. Like I said, this is all a little crazy. Maybe more than a little. I'm not saying you have to hit the panic button just yet. Just make a mental note of where the panic button is, because you never know. And don't think of it as the panic button. Think of it as the opportunity button that says panic on it in big white letters. So I went and got myself all worked up into a lather. So much to say, and I didn't even mention Notch or Kickstarter. So I'm gonna bring this back down as close to Earth as I can. Bioware, I don't know shit about shit, but I do know this. You're better than EA and you don't need them. I'm gonna bring in a segue out of left field. One moment in Fallout New Vegas that I still remember years later is talking with Chief Hanlon on the balcony at Camp Golf. I listened to every scrap of rambling dialogue this old guy had, and then listened to it all again. He told me a story about making the best of a bad situation down in Baja. A story that had nothing to do with anything else in the game. A story that served no practical gameplay purpose. Hearing that story was one of my favorite moments that I've ever had in a game. And if Obsidian had been owned by some big publisher, I don't think I ever would have heard it. It could be you telling that story. You've done it before. You could do it again.